This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices settled over $2 lower on Friday at their lowest level since mid-June as investors eyed a possible ceasefire in Gaza, while a strengthened dollar drove values down further. Brent crude prices settled down $2.48, or 2.9%, to $82.63 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures dropped $2.69, or 3.3%, to $80.13. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said a long-sought ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas was within sight.
U.S. energy firms this week added oil and natural gas rigs for the second time in 3 weeks, energy services firm Baker Hughes said in its closely followed report on Friday. The oil and gas rig count, an early indicator of future output, rose by 2 to 586 in the week to July 19, its highest since late June. Despite this week's rig increase, Baker Hughes said the total count was still down 83 rigs, or 12%, below this time last year. Baker Hughes said oil rigs fell by 1 to 477 this week, their lowest since December 2021, while gas rigs rose by 3 to 103, their highest since mid-May.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Chinese wind turbine makers this month clinched their first order in Germany, as they build momentum in the European market and add to concern in the EU industry that it faces an existential threat. Tensions are high between Beijing and Brussels, the world's two biggest wind markets, as the European Commission, the EU executive, has launched an investigation into whether Chinese players enjoy unfair subsidies. Europe is scarred by the experience of its solar industry more than a decade ago when policymakers took limited action to curb Chinese imports and many European manufacturers collapsed.
Global electricity demand is set to grow at its fastest pace in nearly 20 years this year, spurred by increasing demand for air conditioning as temperatures rise, the International Energy Agency, IEA, said in a report on Friday. The trend, expected to continue into 2025, will support ongoing use of coal power, even as renewable energy production increases, it predicted. The increase in air conditioning use is expected to continue as the primary driver of demand growth, following a year of record global temperatures and severe heat waves pushing grids to maintain a reliable but dirtier baseload supply from sources like coal. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Gold prices dipped more than 2% on Friday, as the dollar gained and profit-taking kicked in following bullion's all-time peak hit earlier this week, which was fueled by rising expectations of U.S. interest rate cuts in September. Spot gold was down 1.9% at $2,399.27 per ounce by 17:58 GMT. Bullion hit an all-time high of $2,483.60 on Wednesday. U.S. gold futures settled 2.3% lower to $2,399.10. The U.S. dollar rose about 0.2% against its rivals, while benchmark 10-year Treasury yields also rose, putting pressure on bullion.
Copper prices fell for a fifth straight session on Friday to the lowest level in 3 months on disquiet about a weak Chinese economy and the lack of stimulus announcements. 3-month copper on the London Metal Exchange, LME, was down 0.9% to $9,305 a metric ton by 1600 GMT, its lowest level since April 8. LME copper is on track for a 5.8% weekly decline, the biggest weekly fall since August 2022. A key political meeting this week in top metals consumer China failed to provide any detail on further stimulus measures despite weaker than expected economic growth data for the second quarter.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
The European Union is set to impose provisional duties on Chinese biodiesel after finding it is being sold in EU markets at unfairly low prices, in the latest in a string of trade cases against China. The European Commission, which oversees EU trade policy, has proposed setting provisional tariffs of between 12.8% and 36.4%, according to a document published on Friday. They are due to be imposed in mid-August. The EU has already set provisional duties for electric vehicles made in China over what it sees as unfair subsidies in its most high-profile case.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.